On today's show, we discuss the status of the Maple Leafs with their pending UFAs, two easy transactions that could clear up loads of cap space for Brad Treliving, and the Hall of Fame announcement was made. Who got in? Who are the snubs? All that more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf centered podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Dave, we've got a busy show ahead of us today. We've got some news and notes from Leafland that we're going to get to in just a moment. We got some clarity on the salary cap. And there's two moves in particular that Brad Treliving can make to open up a wide tons of cap space. Just there's a lot more to be had there. I'll explain what I'm talking about in a couple of minutes. And our guys did not make it into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Cujo, McGillney, big snubs, but we'll tell you who did get in just a little bit. But why don't we start with the Maple Leafs and start with some of the news and notes that we're hearing from around the league, from all the insiders around the NHL. Dave, yesterday I was listening to First Up on 1050 and Chris Johnston reporting that he finds it unlikely that we'll see the Leafs retain any free agents. So the Maple Leafs have 10 free agents. We know them headlined namely by, Luke Schenn, who's a player that a lot of people want to see brought back, Noel Acciari, Ryan O'Reilly, obviously, probably the biggest name. And according to Chris Johnston, it's so late into the process that it might make sense for players at this point to kind of see what's out there on the open market as opposed to return to Toronto. What do you make of that report that out of the 10 UFAs that the Maple Leafs have, they might not bring back any?
It's a little disheartening to hear because there were guys that we would have liked to have brought back. Looking at how many players were brought in, whether that was at the trade deadline or signed. Like, you don't want to have to do such a big, swooping change of the roster. At some point, a little bit of continuity should be something that a lot of teams would want, especially the Leafs, right? You're going through so many changes. You wanted to see if you can, avoid having to bring in so many new guys. But at the same time, we always know that when players come to Toronto and they're pending UFAs, their values tend to get inflated a little bit. And I mean, the agents know that, and they're going to play that as much as possible going into free agency. We've seen it many times, and it wouldn't surprise me if that happens again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that I think we've already kind of cut bait on that we assume aren't going to come back and may not have much need for them to come back. Guys like Eric Gustafsson, Justin Hall, Alex Kerfoot. Doesn't appear that most of the fan base wants those guys to return to Toronto. And it sounds as though with the new regime coming in, they're not going to retain those guys' services either, which does make sense when you look at guys like Kerfoot and Hall. Like, those were two guys who were brought in by Kyle Dubas and gave them their contracts and gave them every opportunity to succeed here in Toronto. Now that he's moved on and he's gone, doesn't sound like they kind of fit what Brad Treliving is trying to do. So it makes sense that some of these players are going to be on their way out. But still, I thought that potentially Luke Schenn would be a priority. I'll say this, though. We had discussed in the past that Ryan O'Reilly, we kind of wrote him off as a potential free agent to bring back into the fold. But I don't know if you heard on Insider Trading, but Pierre LeBrun was actually reporting that there have been discussions with O'Reilly in his camp. Brad Treliving circled back to Ryan O'Reilly to see if there's interest in coming back to Toronto to see what a type of deal, what a deal could look like, to see if they can make something work. I mean, I still would love to bring Ryan O'Reilly back into the fold. Like, is there a number you think makes sense for the Maple Leafs to bring him back, though, Dave?
Well, if you think about where you would want him to play, if he's going to be the second line center, he's going to ask for $5+ million. What I think the Leafs should be comfortable paying, like, it's probably not going to work, but I would say in that $3.5 to $4 million range.
Ooh, you wouldn't be willing to go to 5 for Ryan O'Reilly?
Depends on the term,
That's a
right?
fair point. Let's say he wants a 3-year deal, 3 years, 15 sheets. Turn that down?
Oh, that's really tough. I think you can stomach it, but that's tough to pay that much for a guy who, he's not exactly he's slowing down a little bit. Few injuries the last couple of years. You got to be careful of how many miles are on that body, especially.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's a fair point. There definitely is, some negatives to Ryan O'Reilly at this point. Do got to be wary for guys on the wrong side of 30, but he is a player that if the Maple Leafs have circled back and if they can try and get something sorted out, I would imagine that a lot of Leafs Nation would be happy to see Ryan O'Reilly return in the white and blue and beat his team second line center, move Tavares to the wing. Maybe you get, the Tavares and O'Reilly and Marner line next season, get them cooking on a full year, see what that could end up doing for the Maple Leafs. I wouldn't mind seeing that, if I'm being quite honest with you. I think I'd be willing to go to like a $5 million AAV. I think I'd be willing to go that high for a guy like Ryan O'Reilly. To me, it makes sense. He can kill penalties for you. He's got the leadership, championship ability. And when he was healthy last year in the playoffs, he wasn't healthy in round 2, but in round 1, especially early, he was the team's MVP early on in that series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, it wasn't until an injury came where it sounds as though there was a foot injury that impacted his play in that Florida series. If that wasn't the case, who knows, man? Who knows how different things could have been this playoff if they had a healthy Ryan O'Reilly in round 2. So if they can bring him back into the fold for a couple of seasons, I'd be on board. He's the type of player that you don't mind splurging on a little bit. You know what I mean? Like he at $3.5 million, I think is ludicrous to assume that he would ever come back. Like Kerfoot made $3.5 million last year, and they were comfortable paying Kerfoot $3.5 million. You think that they're gonna, stick to 3.5 at Raw for Ryan O'Reilly? I think you're high off your rocker if you think that that's gonna get it done. But in the $5 to $5.5 million range, on a 2-3 year term, I don't know if I want to go much longer than 3 years, but that's somewhere where I would be comfortable. 5 to 5.5 on a 3 or less term. I'd bring back Ryan O'Reilly in a heartbeat.
I mean, if that's what the cost is, like, I'm just trying to think what he would realistically get in the free agent market. I would say it would definitely be north of 5. It's just the term that's the one I'm really having a hard time figuring out, because you're trying to figure out like comparables for Ryan O'Reilly on the free agent market.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why I'm struggling to figure when I first put out my number, because I just don't know. Like, he was making just over $7 million last on his last deal. So he's not going to ever get that. He's topped out at what he made before. So yeah, you're now expecting to take a couple $1 million less, and obviously if less term. I think $5 million. You can find a way to make that work, but you're going to have to do some creative stuff with the roster around it to make it all fit.
Oh, it's funny you mentioned that, Dave, because on the other side, why don't we take a look at the salary cap? It appears that we know what the ceiling is going to be. We'll tell you what that number is, and I'll tell you a way that you can clear up enough cap space that it could make some sense to give $5+ million to a guy like Ryan O'Reilly. I've got 2 moves in mind to clear up some cap space for the Maple Leafs. We'll tell you those in just a minute, but before we do, let me tell you guys about one of today's show sponsors, and it's our friends at Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Flash deals and last-minute tickets. They're easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event. You can see images of your seats, and you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds. Just 2 taps, and your set tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you'll never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with my co-host Dave Morassutti. This is a Leaf-centric podcast. We got brand new episodes coming out Monday through Friday each weekday. So if you're craving that Leafs content each and every day, make sure that you are subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, also up on YouTube as well. So we appreciate that. And hey, let us know in the comment section down below. Are you interested in paying $5 million AAV for a guy like Ryan O'Reilly? What would you be comfortable paying? I don't want to put a number on it. Let us know down below. What's the comfortable contract you would like the Maple Leafs to offer Ryan O'Reilly to come back and be part of this team going forward into next season and beyond? Let us know in the comment section down below. So as I mentioned, I think there's a couple of ways that the Maple Leafs can create enough cap space to make a sizable signing such as Ryan O'Reilly, or re-signing at this point. So we finally got some clarity on the salary cap, Dave. It appears that it's only going to rise by $1 million, which is what we expected at first. Then there was some talk about maybe it could raise, a couple more million if they get enough of the debt paid down. Turns out that did not happen, and it's going to remain at just a $1 million increase. Again, bit of a flat cap. So the cap ceiling next season is set, or will be set, at $83.5 million. So Dave, let's take a look at the Leafs' current cap situation, okay? They currently has 15 contracts counting toward their active roster next season. Those 15 players allocate for $74.3 million, which leaves them roughly $9 million in cap space. And that's a decent amount, I would say. Like, there's clearly some more signings that have to be made. The roster, there's a lot of holes on that roster. But starting out, they got $9 million right now. That's not a terrible amount of money to go out and sign 5 guys, 5 more players, depth players mainly, to your roster. It's not a terrible number to be starting with heading into the offseason.
No, and considering you got most of your top end guys on the blue line, you've got your top 4 figured out pretty much. You're really just adding a lot of depth pieces and trying to maybe round out the rest of the roster in a lot of ways. So $9 million isn't, you will want more than $9 million, but it's not like they have nothing to work with there. There's a lot of, you can find a lot of bargains out there in the free agency if you're willing to be patient.
Yeah, they are smack dab right in the middle in terms of cap space for in the entire league, is in terms of how much cap space they have at this very moment heading into next season. So they can make more cap space, though. They can open up an additional $14.7 million, an additional $9 million by making 2 moves, Dave, which would bring them to an $18.7 million in space to make some moves. And you could do a lot of damage with $18 million, I think. So I'll tell you exactly what those are. The first one, look, again, this isn't a sexy move, and it's not one that is pulling the wool over people's eyes here, but it's one that we fully expect to happen, and that's Jake Muzzin ending up on LTIR. Right? Jake Muzzin ends up on LTIR this summer. They'll gain an additional $5.65 million in cap space, which would bring them up to about $14.7 million. And look, I hate that that's, become reality for Jake Muzzin, but it just doesn't seem like he's going to be able to play hockey anymore. And, the one benefit, I guess, is it does help the Maple Leafs with their cap situation. The other move, which is one that I think is probably the one that's a little bit more controversial that we could talk about here, whether or not that we want to go down that route, is the buyout of Matt Murray. I know that you spoke about it last week when I was off the show, so I didn't get a chance to touch on it and give my thoughts on it. But buying out Matt Murray creates an additional $4 million in cap space this year. So you put Muzz on LTIR, you buy out Matt Murray, all of a sudden you've got $18.7 million in cap space for the Maple Leafs, which is the 9th most cap space in the NHL if they do those moves. You can do some serious changing to this roster if you're Brad Treliving with $18.7 million in space.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the Matt Murray buyout situation, it certainly does help the Leafs window in this upcoming season. It's just you're going to have to eat that 2.5 the year after. The benefit there too is you're not having to waste an asset trying to move that contract, and I get that part too. I just wonder, are they trying to exhaust every last potential option to move him before they do that? And the problem here is, and I noticed this, is how many other teams are trying to move contracts right now. Like Blake Wheeler that's a very expensive contract that they're trying to move. And a lot more teams may want to just go and take a Blake Wheeler than a Matt Murray, because Matt Murray's,
Blake Wheeler might actually play for you.
Yeah, Blake Wheeler might actually play, and a motivated Blake Wheeler might actually not be half bad, right? Like Matt Murray, if you tell a team, okay, take Matt Murray, I guess what you're going to tell them is there's a really good chance you're just going to put him on LTIR anyways. Potentially. True. I mean, but again, that's a hypothetical, and it's becoming a lot tougher to really gauge if that's a possibility, because we don't know if Matt Murray, what his health status is. I think Dubas and Keefe said that he was fine, like he was healthy.
He was the backup for Joe Wall in game 4 and 5, right? So he was there. He was available for the Maple Leafs. He was healthy and he was there. So, at the end of the year, he was considered a healthy body for Toronto, but was considered their third string goaltender. Like Joe Wall passed him in on the depth chart. And if this team plans on bringing back Ilya Samsonov, or if they plan on bringing in another goaltender to be kind of their 1A to go along with Joseph Wall, Matt Murray's not in the fold. Like, I don't see a way, unless Matt Murray is an LTIR candidate also, which I guess can't be out of the question. However, can you really roll the dice and just thinking, okay, he'll end up on LTIR? Like, can you do the Joffrey Lupul thing where it's like, no, your knees are bothering you all season long? Like, you know what I mean? Like, only Lou Lamoriello was able to get away with that Robida Island stuff. I don't know if you can send Matt Murray there, or if he'll play ball in that regard. So for me, I think it'd be a lot safer just to trade him away, or I don't know if I would not be willing to give up the type of asset that it would cost to trade out Matt Murray. So I think the buyout makes a ton of sense. You're saving $4 million this year, and then you've got an additional $2 million the following season. But keep in mind, the cap is supposed to raise like $5-6 million that year. So it's not going to be as hurtful, I suppose, as you would think it would be. Plus you have, a couple other contracts that are going to be falling off that season as well. That would give you a little bit more space. So to me, the buyout makes more sense, to be honest with you, than it does the trade. I think the Leafs are in a situation where they just can't afford to trade any more first round picks. They don't have a second round pick. Like they pretty much only have a first to deal. I don't think a third's going to get it done. So they have a first, and they don't even have a third this season either. Yeah, so they got a first round pick, and that's what they'd have to move. Could they do something similar where like they trade a first to Matt Murray for a third and just slide back into the draft the way they did last year with Peter Mrazek? Perhaps. But you look at the money owed to Matt Murray. I mean, that's $8 million in cash this year. $2 million of it Ottawa's picking up, but that's $6 million, all salary, that whoever trades for Matt Murray is going to have to pay him $6 million in cash. That's going to cost a lot of money. I mean, do you remember what it costs during the offseason or during the trade deadline to pick up like, I don't know, 160,000 or something like that when Minnesota was brokering deals to get guys like Ryan O'Reilly and Patrick Kane and Tarasenko traded. It cost a 4th-round pick for like 160 grand worth of money. Imagine what $6 million is going to be worth to a team. I could tell you what it is because remember, it happened before with the Maple Leafs and Patrick Marleau. It cost him a 1st-round pick. So I would imagine it could also cost him a similar amount, considering, like you said, there's a very competitive market for teams to offload bad contracts where it's a buyer's market in a way when you're buying bad contracts, and you probably will be able to create a bidding war to weaponize your cap space. And if that's the case, it's going to cost a lot to get Matt Murray dealt away from Toronto. So for me, it's the buyout is probably the better option, the smarter option. And again, you do that buyout, you place Muzz on LTIR. All of a sudden, the Maple Leafs are laughing with about $18.7 million in cap space. All of a sudden, there's some money there for Ryan O'Reilly, isn't there? There's some money there to go out and get another, top 4 defenseman, maybe a Dmitry Orlov potentially, isn't there? Like, there's some money to give to Ilya Samsonov now. There's some money to give, to some other depth players and pieces. So I think that these two moves can really create enough cap space for the Maple Leafs to make a couple of pretty decent ads this summer.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an easy route to go. And then hopefully we get some clarity on the Matt Murray situation, like well before the draft. Because it was nice that the Leafs were able to pawn off the Peter Mrazek deal with Kyle Dubas being able to make that one work. But as you said, this is going to be a much tougher one to do just because of the money owed. So I'm just, are you surprised that the Matt Murray buyout, if they were doing a buyout, hasn't happened yet?
No, because I'd imagine that they're trying to find a trade partner, and then last case scenario would be to buy him out. Like I would imagine that pretty much in their heads. If I was Brad Treliving, I would say I'd be willing to trade any pick but a 1st rounder for someone to take on Matt Murray without having any retention. Like I give like a future 2nd, a future 3rd, whatever it would cost to get Matt Murray off the books. I would do that. But I would imagine those phone calls are being made right now. He also has had so many other things on his plate with being in Arizona, talking to Austin Matthews, chatting with Sheldon Keefe for figuring out if he wants him to be part of the fold. And then now they're talking about other assistants to potentially join the coaching staff with Spencer Carberry leaving. Apparently he's circled back to Ryan O'Reilly maybe to bring him back as a free agent. You've got scouting meetings, both for amateur with the draft coming up and pro scouting meetings with free agency coming up. Like there's just so much going on that, I guess Matt Murray, it's like, okay, we'll see what happens, but if a trade doesn't happen by the end of the buyout window, then we'll buy him out. I think they'll just try and buy some time before they have to make that move. I'd imagine. I could be wrong, but I would imagine that's where they're sitting.
Yeah, I actually was on the Offside Hockey Talk podcast and I said that the Matt Murray situation, that should be like the number one thing to be looking at. I understand that Austin Matthews is priority 1 to resign and all those things, but Matt Murray's contract is like the biggest thing hanging over the front office right now.
Yes, but like that's legitimately just a matter of like that can be done with a snap of the finger. Like this other stuff takes conversation and negotiation, and like you have to convince somebody else to do something. Buying out Matt Murray is easy as literally submitting paperwork and boom, that's done. You know what I mean? So that's not something that you'd be stressing. I don't think if you're Brad Treliving, because you know that if he wants to do it, it's done, right? Like he doesn't have to find a dance partner to make it happen like you would a trade or a re-signing of a player or an extension or what have you. This is really just when he gets around to it, which I assume will be prior to the deadline. It'll get done. I think it's just not at the top of his priority list because he knows it's just a matter of submitting paperwork.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm just thinking hopefully they figure that out soon because I don't think you can go even like the draft. Like you, do you think like with the draft they want that? Are they trying to keep that option open? I just don't. That's the thing I've been wondering.
Probably, I'd
So
imagine so. Like we're what, a week away from the draft now. Like I
e-
would imagine that they'll probably try and keep that option alive in the draft the same way that they did with Peter Mrazek. And then if that Mrazek deal didn't come to fruition, maybe they would have bought him out. Similarly here, if no trade comes to fruition for Matt Murray and they don't find a taker for that contract, then the next step is to buy him out. Because don't get me wrong, I mean, you don't want to have that $2 million cap hit on your book. So if someone's willing to take that salary on at the price that you're comfortable with in terms of asset, whether it's as a prospect or a future, mid-round draft pick, sure, you make that move, you make that trade. Maybe someone wants to roll the dice on former two-time Stanley Cup champion Matt Murray. You know what I mean? Where when he does play, he's a pretty good goaltender, but he doesn't often play, which is the bigger problem, and has been for the better part of 3-4 years now throughout his career. So, yeah, we'll see what ends up happening with the Matt Murray situation, but I would imagine that it won't be one come July 1st that we're worried about. I'd imagine that'll be solved prior to July 1, and that cap space will be available for the Maple Leafs. Man, we ended up taking that segment really long. All right, let's quickly hit a break. When we come back, let's chat a little bit about the Hockey Hall of Fame, talk about some of the names that were announced today and some that were snubbed, including a couple of former Maple Leafs. So we'll do that on the other side. But first, Dave, how about a word from our show sponsor?
Yep. If you are looking for a pair of shorts that are designed to slip firmer through the thigh and the leg to give you the most sculpted look and also to actually look nice too, then you got to look at the Birddogs shorts. They're the new khaki shorts that Mike and I actually got a pair sent to us. I've been using mine playing golf. That's been my number one use for them, but they're good for many other things. They do the exact same thing as Lululemons, but they fit way better. And they fit better than regular shorts because they're not made of the stiff restricting cotton. They found a way to use a cloud knit fabric that looks just like a khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And they use anti-sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So if you're also looking for another incentive to go and get yourself some Birddogs, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you that.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. Appreciate you listening this far, but a half hour into the show. So if you're still listening, thank you so much. You're one of the real ones here on the Locked On Leafs. We've had a lot of new people subscribe to the show recently, Dave. So we're thankful for those who are new to the show. Appreciate it. Again, new podcast coming out each weekday, Monday through Friday. You'll still get that Leaf fix. As long as you're subscribed and locked in to Locked On Leafs. Well, yesterday's podcast, Dave, we talked a lot about the Hockey Hall of Fame. We talked about two former Maple Leafs who we felt were due to get into the Hall. Neither got in. Alex McGillney and Curtis Joseph both snubbed from the Hall of Fame. How shocked were you to see? I mean, Cujo maybe was a bit borderline, but I think McGillney is the biggest snub of them all for me.
That remains the most perplexing one of them all, in my opinion, just because I thought I made a great compelling argument of why he should have gotten in. And everyone's been like, if you look at the last few years of Hockey Hall of Fame induction candidates, almost you can't find an article that didn't include Alexander McGillney as like a list of the candidates. And then how many people I've seen vouch for Alexander McGillney, and for some reason it's not even something that the Hockey Hall of Fame wants to entertain. And it we didn't we I don't like we don't really hear about why certain guys don't get in. And I feel like, okay, I understand is this they want to keep the process, locked and key, but I'm sorry, this is where I feel like, just like almost every other sports Hall of Fame, there's some they show like who's voted for what. So at least we would know if there's anybody in that room fighting for Alexander McGillney. I feel like fans at this point need to know that, because it makes people speculate as to why he doesn't get in either, and I'm sure you've seen some of the speculation behind that too.
Yeah, there's no transparency is the situation with the Hockey Hall of Fame, where every year, hockey fans find themselves, doing the whole Jackie Chan meme where they're just wondering what is going on in that room, where guys like McGillney, for years has been a big snub. Kachuk, is Keith Kachuk. Big Walt is another guy who many feel has been snubbed year after year. Rod Brindamore is another guy who probably deserves to get in at some point and consistently ends up getting the old snub job here. But yeah, I thought McGillney, more than any of them, does deserve to get in for a lot of reasons that we mentioned on yesterday's podcast. He was what is it, third in goals per game in his career, something like that.
He's third in goals for by all Russian players. I think he was like top 20 in goals per game, like across the NHL. Like,
Yeah,
like not just through a certain period, but all time. Like there's just so many. There's just so much, and like when Pierre Turgeon is like the non-goalie and non-female hockey player to get in, and you're just like, is Pierre Turgeon like that much better than Alexander McGillney?
I mean, in my books, no, but like, to be fair, Pierre Turgeon was basically on his way out as like I was getting into hockey, so I can't give a fair grasp on it. Like I remember McGillney mainly as, well, I guess pretty much mainly as a Leaf, I suppose, just because that's when I started to get into hockey and kind of understand what was going on, 2001, 2002, 2003, and whatnot. But I knew that guy was different. That guy was special. And then obviously, as I got older and wiser, I learned more. Okay, McGillney was a devil and a Sabre captain, and he was amazing, and he scored 76 goals one year, and Stanley Cup champion, four-time All-Star, Lady Bing winger. Like there's just so many. The Triple Crown Club, one of the few members a part of that, Olympic gold medalist, world champion gold medal, juniors gold medal. Like the guy is so well decorated to go along with the story of him also defecting from Russia to play in the NHL. All of that encompasses what, in my mind, should make a slam dunk case to be a Hockey Hall of Famer. And yeah, it's gross that he year after year still consistently gets slept on and passed up. It boggles my mind, man. It really, really boggles my mind. We shouldn't mention who did get nominated for the Hockey Hall of Fame, I suppose. As we predicted, Henrik Lundqvist was a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was nominated. This was really the year of the goalie. Like goaltenders have always kind of got the short end of the stick when it came to election into the Hockey Hall of Fame. They made up for that this year because of the four players, male players, I suppose. Carolyn Ouellette was considered the female player who got in, who we also correctly predicted yesterday. Three of the four guys were goaltenders this year.
Yeah,
Not
it's
one of
very
them
strange.
Cujo. Not one of them Cujo, however.
Nope.
But three of the four were goaltenders. So yeah, so Henrik Lundqvist, first time on the ballot, he gets in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. Tom Barrasso ends up getting the call to the Hall, and Mike Vernon. So of those three, like, would you put Cujo, like if you had to power rank, right? Lundqvist, Barrasso, Vernon, and Cujo as to who you thought was more deserving to get into the Hall first. Not that they won't get in eventually, but who would get in ahead of the other? Like, how would you have power ranked those?
I would put Lundqvist first. I think
Yeah,
that's fair.
same.
I honestly would put Curtis Joseph second, Tom Barrasso third, and Mike Vernon fourth.
I could probably hear the conversation to have Barrasso at second. I would listen to it.
Yeah,
I
there's
would
an
listen
argument.
to it. But I don't really get the Mike Vernon over Cujo. That one doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, like Vernon had a couple of good years, I suppose. That season in Calgary where they won the cup, and I think it was like '89. Is that when they won that cup with Lanny McDonald and them? Um,
I believe so.
that was a really good season, obviously. But for me, when I look at the careers, just Curtis Joseph, man, like to me, he had the better career, like not accolade wise, obviously, but when you look at him as an individual, which again, that's what the Hall of Fame is. It's based off of individuality. I just feel like Cujo maybe should have got the call over Vernon this year, and maybe Vernon gets it next year. Next season perhaps could have been Vernon's time, but unfortunately, both the guys that we advocated for on yesterday's podcast, Curtis Joseph and Alex McGillney, both got the old snub and won't be as part of the 2023 Hall of Fame class. But it was Lundqvist, Barrasso, Mike Vernon, Pierre Turgeon, Caroline Ouellette, Ken Hitchcock gets in as a in the builder category. So big ups to Ken Hitchcock. That guy's just been a hockey lifer. I'm glad to see him go into the Hall of Fame. And Pierre Lacroix also goes in the builder category as well. So that is the official Hockey Hall of Fame class of 2023. No McGillney, no Cujo, no Kachuk, no Brindamore. Oh, well, we'll have to wait to next year to see if one of those guys finally gets into the fold. Really,
I will say Tom Barrasso did spend 4 games with the Toronto Maple Leafs, so there is a Leaf connection in this year's Hall of Fame class.
We do have, that's true. One former Leaf goaltender is in the 2023 class, just not the one we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
But we'll take claim. We'll take claim for it. Absolutely. Former Maple Leaf Tom Barrasso, Hockey Hall of Famer. Good on you, pal. Mike Vernon, congrats, but should have had 2 Leaf goaltenders in the 2023 class. Funny enough, Henrik Lundqvist, former Washington Capital. Remember that?
Yep.
Do you remember that? What a weird situation. He should have just hung it up after the Rangers. So weird that he's just got that, couple of picks in a Washington Capital sweater.
Just so it's just he's one of those goalies where it's just like you can't picture him with another team. You could just never do that.
Look it up really quickly because my computer is gonna lag if I try and look it up. How many games he actually played for? Because I know he ended up getting hurt. So he didn't end up like finishing out his contract.
So, I hate to say this, it was actually 0.
So he didn't end up playing any games. So he signed the contract and then he got hurt. Okay, so
he had a heart condition that kept him.
That's what it was. Yes, it was a health concern. That's what it was.
He didn't
I do remember being weirded out by the whole thing, but then I was trying to think, like, did he actually end up playing any games? That's why I wanted you to look it up because I wasn't sure if he ended up playing any. But yeah, so the heart condition popped up before he ended up playing any games, but he was a member and got paid as a Washington Capital once upon a time. So yeah, we'll all forget about that, as will Henrik Lundqvist, I'm sure. Anyway, congrats to the class. November they'll be inducted, and I'm sure it'll be a good time. Really quickly before we leave, actually, I wanted to just mention that this report that's out there from Sportico that apparently Larry Tannenbaum, he's 25% owner of MLSE, which obviously owns the Toronto Maple Leafs, looking to offload some shares of MLSE to the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System Pension Plan, which that's a mouthful, so they call it OMERS, the OMERS Pension Plan. And apparently MLSE recently, or he's negotiating with an $8 billion valuation on MLSE. So he owns 25% of it. So he owns $2 billion worth of MLSE stock currently as a 25% owner of the group. And I don't think he's not looking to sell all of it, but he's looking to sell some of it, it appears. And that's real interesting. So maybe we'll try and dig into this story a little bit, and we can chat about it on tomorrow's show. But just wanted to float that out there for those who are interested. We'll talk a little bit about it more on tomorrow's podcast. But that'll do it for us here today on the show. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the podcast. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasting platforms and receive daily Leafs content. You can follow us on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, smash that like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Leave a comment down below as well. It helps with the algorithm. It pushes the video around to people. So we'd like to know your thoughts on the Leafs situation, on their cap situation. Let us know down below. All right, we're back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.